In the closing hours of the Great Crusade, as the galaxy reeled under the weight of treachery and fire, the Emperor of Mankind stood at the precipice of annihilation and foresaw a truth more terrible than betrayal. Not the Horus Heresy, not even the ruination of the Legions Astartes would be mankind's greatest threat. No, the real enemy was the warp itself, the limitless abyss of unreality, from which demons whispered madness into mortal minds and gods of corruption clawed at reality's veil. From the dark places beyond reason, the four great chaos powers looked upon the material realm with ravenous hunger. And in their gaze, the Emperor saw the Imperium's fate, if left unguarded, a galaxy devoured not by war, but by damnation. It was then, amidst the blood and fire of treachery, that the Emperor conceived a vision, a plan not forged in brute strength or political might, but in secrecy, purity, and psychic truth. He would create a new kind of warrior, not mere soldiers like the Space Marines forged from Primarchs who, even in loyalty, bore fatal flaws. Not mortal psykers, so vulnerable to the warp's deceitful touch. No, this would be a brotherhood beyond corruption, an order conceived in silence, wrought in the Emperor's own image, and they would stand eternal, even when the stars themselves failed. The idea took root not on battlefields nor in strategy halls, but in the secret places of the Imperial Palace, deep within the inner sanctum of the Sigillite. Malcador, the Emperor's most trusted servant, had long been his agent in the shadows. Where Primarchs waged war, Malcador planned for the survival of mankind's soul. He had walked beside the Emperor through the age of strife, peered into the warp's heart, and understood, truly, what the long war would require. The Emperor told him the truth, that chaos would not die with Horus, nor would mankind's survival be guaranteed by victory at Terra. And so the Sigillite listened, grave and silent, as the Emperor entrusted him with a task unlike any other, a project born not of necessity, but of prophecy. The Emperor revealed to Malcador the cornerstone of this vision, a gene seed unlike any other, one that bore not the legacy of a Primarch, but the essence of the Emperor himself, pure, untainted, and radiant with psychic potential. This was no mere biological matrix, it was an inheritance of will, crafted not just to birth warriors, but incorruptible minds. The decision to use his own genetic essence was not made lightly. The Emperor understood its danger as much as its promise. It would never be replicated, never given to another chapter. It was the last and only of its kind, a spark of divinity in mortal form. But such power required vessels worthy to bear it. And so Malcador was charged with his second task, to find the Eight. Across the ravaged stars, Malcador would seek out warriors already touched by the fire of heresy and found unburned. Men who had faced the eye of terror and did not blink. Space Marines from the most dishonored legions, some from those declared traitor, but who had remained loyal when their brethren turned. They had seen the true face of chaos and chosen defiance over despair. Some were psykers, long forced to hide their gifts under the edicts of Nicaea. Others were captains and sergeants who had refused to raise their blades against their emperor, even when their own gene fathers demanded it. These were not the brightest stars of the legions, but the rarest ones, unbreakable, unshakable, unyielding. They were survivors of shattered oaths, yet their loyalty had only sharpened. By Malcador's hand, they were brought in secret to Terra. They passed unnoticed through battle lines hidden by ancient wards and psychic cloaks. Not even the custodians guarding the throne knew the full truth of their arrival. 12 men were assembled, 4 of noble blood, steeped in lore and destined for high command, and 8 warriors, chosen not for their name or lineage, but for the incorruptible core that pulsed within them. The Emperor met them in silence, beyond the ken of mortal ears, beyond even the High Lords. None who were present ever spoke of what was said, and none would ever forget. What is known is only this. The Emperor looked upon the 8 Space Marines and saw in them the foundation of something greater. Not a chapter, not yet, but a weapon, a symbol, a secret that would survive when all else had failed. He did not speak of honor. He did not offer glory. Instead, he gave them a choice. To walk away, to live and die as Space Marines, heroes perhaps, but fallible, or to be reborn, to cast off their names, their legions, their pasts, to take up a burden that could never be shared, known, or understood, to become weapons of the throne. All 8 chose rebirth. Their names were erased from Imperial records, their legions struck from their souls. Whatever they had once been, whatever honors or crimes lay in their past, they died that day as individuals, and something new was born in their place. Not in ceremony, not with heralds or thunder, but in silence. So began the hidden genesis of the Emperor's greatest secret. They would not carry banners. They would not march with the legions. Their victories would never be recorded in the chronicles of the Crusade. They would exist in the margins of history, unseen and unacknowledged, but they would endure, and in the darkness to come, when the Imperium trembled before demons and madness, they would be there, silver-clad, pure of purpose, forged from the Emperor's own essence, the last, best hope against the dying of the light. They were not yet the Grey Knights, but the Emperor had seen them, and in his vision they would become mankind's silent salvation. While the Emperor held his vigil upon the golden throne, the warp-shattered skies above Terra boiling with the wrath of traitor fleets, one man moved through the shadows with a purpose known to none but his master. Malcador the Sigillite, regent of Terra, First Lord of the Council of Terra, founder of the Inquisition, was no warlord, no general. He wielded no bolter, no blade, and bore no legion's colors. And yet, in those final days before the siege of Terra truly began, he carried upon his shoulders a task that could break even a Primarch. For Malcador had been charged not merely with commanding Terra's desperate defense or managing the crumbling empire's bureaucracy, but with a sacred and secret mission: to find the 8. They would not be found among parades of honor or archives of renown. No summons would reach them, no glory would be promised. For the 8 were to be the foundation of something new, something pure, souls untainted, minds unbending, psyches that could not be broken even by the infernal gaze of the gods of the warp. Malcador needed warriors, but more than that, he needed men who had seen the face of darkness and spat into its gaping maw. Not innocence, not ignorance, but experience. Survivors who had wrestled with the abyss and emerged uncorrupted. He began his search in silence. On distant worlds, scarred by civil war, Malcador walked among the ruins cloaked by warp sight and ancient sigils. He stood on the battlefields of Istvan V, sifting through psychic echoes that still clung to the stones, hearing the screams of betrayed brothers and the lies whispered by demons. From shattered strongholds where loyalist remnants clung to life, he watched captains die defending civilians they could not save, watched sergeants refuse dark offers whispered in the night. And when he found such souls, rare, burning with a light that refused to go out, he took them. Not with force, not with demand. He offered them something greater than vengeance, greater even than redemption. He offered them purpose. The 8 came from different legions, each scarred by the heresy in their own way. One was a librarian of the word bearers, hidden since Nicaea, who had refused to kneel when Lorgar summoned his legion to damnation. His kin had mocked him for resisting the gods they now worshipped, but he endured. When Malcador arrived, he found the librarian meditating within a burning temple, the words of the imperial truth carved into his flesh with a knife of obsidian. Another was a warrior of the Lunar Wolves, once an honored captain under Horus himself. When the War Master turned, this captain did not follow. He led his men into the Eye of Terror, not to conquer, but to flee. Malcador found him months later on a demon-haunted moon, half dead, surrounded by the corpses of the cursed and the insane. He had killed every one of his corrupted brothers with his own hands. There was a survivor of the Death Guard, his lungs choked black with Nurgle's gift, yet untouched by plague in soul. A son of Mortarion who had escaped the creeping rot by isolating himself in a chemical tomb. His body failed, but his mind was like iron. When Malcador came, he stepped from the tomb, coughing blood, and bowed with trembling pride. Another was from the Thousand Sons, not one who had fought at Prospero, but a scholar stranded far from Magnus's fall, tormented by visions, hunted by his own legion for refusing the call of sorcery. He had burned every book that might summon a demon, yet still carried one tome, wrapped in chains and sealed with sigils of light. When Malcador asked why he had not destroyed it, the man answered, "Because I must remember what must never be allowed to return." There were others, less known, more hidden. A Night Lord's executioner who had turned against Curse, a World Eater who had locked his chain axe in a vault and refused to draw it again until it could be used for justice. A son of the Iron Hands whose bionics had begun to fail, yet who held fast to the belief that flesh, broken or not, could still serve the Emperor's will. And a Raven Guard scout who had fought alone behind enemy lines, refusing extraction until every prisoner on a chaos-held moon had been freed or avenged. 8 warriors, 8 stories, 8 lives that had endured fire, treachery, and the voices of gods. Malcador offered them no reward, no rank, no recognition. Only this, an oath that would erase their pasts, a future in which they would be forgotten, a task that would kill them in silence should it not damn them first. Each of them accepted. Their extraction from the dying Imperium was as secretive as their recruitment. They traveled under veil of shadow, across warp routes known only to the Sigillite and the Emperor himself. Time moved strangely on their journey. Some experienced weeks, others mere hours. Aboard ships warded by 1,000 layers of psychic sigils, they were cut off from their pasts, stripped of identity. They did not speak of their legions. They did not ask one another for names. They were not brothers, not yet. And yet in Malcador's presence, something grew between them. A unity not born of allegiance, but of shared purpose. They understood, without it needing to be said, that what was being asked of them was not merely to fight. It was to become a new foundation, a brotherhood that could stand where even the Primarchs had faltered. The journey ended not in Terra's orbit, but beyond the throne world's gaze. They arrived upon Luna, the cradle of the Emperor's first true experiments in gene forging. It was there, beneath the silver surface, in vaults forgotten by even the Mechanicum, that the 8 were brought before a sight none could have imagined. Within a stasis chamber, held in psychic suspension, floated vials of gene seed, golden-hued, radiant, and utterly still. "This," Malcador whispered, "is not from any Primarch. This is the Emperor's own." The chamber shuddered with silent power. None dared speak. Even the warrior from the Word-Bearers fell to his knees. This was not science. This was divinity. Malcador gave them no time for reverence. There was work to be done, trials to begin, transformations to endure. But for this moment, this single holy instant, they were allowed to see the truth of what they would become. They would not be the sons of any Primarch. They would be the Emperor's own shadow, a new kind of warrior, unseen, unknown, unfailing. And this quest, Malcador's final, most secret mission, would one day be forgotten by all but them, but it would change the fate of the galaxy forever. They were never meant to be remembered, not by name, not by legion, not by deed. Their identities, like footprints in ash, were deliberately wiped away. But for a brief, flickering moment in time, before anonymity became their shield, they were known to one another. 8 warriors, bound not by blood or origin, but by choice. These were the chosen 8, not the best, not the brightest, but the purest, men who had seen the abyss and turned away, who had faced the siren call of the warp and answered with silence, men whose loyalty was not born of blind faith, but forged in trials no one else had survived. When they gathered for the first time, there was no ceremony, no banners, no titles, only a circular stone chamber in a vault deep beneath Luna's surface, dimly lit by crystalline lanterns. A place saturated in wards so ancient, even Malcador treated the walls with reverence. The 8 stood apart, silent as statues, examining each other with cautious curiosity. No armor adorned their bodies now, no heraldry, no sigils of their former legions. Their power armor had been ritually scrubbed and disassembled, their weapons purified and locked away. Their very names were unspoken. They wore simple robes of storm gray, belted at the waist, each thread woven with psychic glyphs to repel intrusion. Even their thoughts, shielded by early training in mental discipline, were carefully muted. These were men used to solitude, forged by pain and betrayal. Warriors who had buried brothers with their own hands. Some of them had fought one another in past lives. None of them said it aloud. Malcador stood at the center of them all, not with a speech, but a presence. He did not speak until the silence had settled so heavily, it seemed even the air dared not stir. "You are not here because you are powerful," the Sigillite said, his voice soft but absolute. "You are here because you endured." His eyes moved slowly over them. Chaos does not seduce with strength. It whispers, it offers, it waits. And you, each of you, said no. Again and again, until your brothers fell and you remained standing in a world you no longer recognized. One of the 8, tall, broad-shouldered, with a noticeable limp from a leg injury, long healed but never forgotten, shifted his weight. The others remained motionless. "You were not chosen because of your victories," Malcador continued. "You were chosen because you refused to break." He paced slowly around them. "You will be remade, physically, psychically, spiritually. What you were will be gone. What you become will be secret. Even the High Lords will not speak your names. You will be a weapon without glory, a flame that leaves no ash, a shield the Imperium will never know it wields." It was not rhetoric, it was prophecy, and none of them doubted it. The formal rituals began that same day, a ceremony not of war but of forgetting. They were led, one by one, into the Chamber of Nullification, an anechoic vault designed not merely to suppress sound, but to erase identity. As each warrior stepped inside, a psychic cipher was imprinted into their minds. Every name they had ever borne, every face that had called them brother, every mark, every tattoo, every sigil of legion and origin, burned clean by the Emperor's own design. It was not a deletion, it was a rebirth. The memories were locked, not lost, buried behind layers of psychic encryption, accessible only under the most extreme circumstances. But to them, in all practical senses, their pasts ceased to exist. They emerged not as sons of the legions, but as the foundation of a new, unnamed order. The next ritual was more intimate and more painful. Each warrior was given a silver dagger, unadorned, polished to a mirror finish, and told to make a single cut across the palm of his hand, not for blood, but for oath. With that wound, they swore upon pain and soul, I give up who I was. I become what must be. My will is the Emperor's. My strength is for the silence. My life is for the fire. My death is for nothing but the end of demons. And the wound would never fully heal, even with the most advanced Medicae or psychic regeneration. That single, shallow line across the palm remained, cold to the touch, slightly silvered, a reminder etched into flesh. It was not a brand of shame, it was a badge of truth. They began training together soon after. It was unlike anything they had known, even as Space Marines. Their minds were tested first, thrown into psychic crucibles where nightmare demons whispered promises of power, glory, or salvation. The 8 learned not merely to resist temptation, but to recognize its 1,000 forms. One test, called the Mirror Trial, forced them to relive their worst failure as if it had succeeded. A librarian saw himself accept the warp's gifts and ascend into a demon prince. A captain saw himself order a virus bombing of civilians to cover his retreat. A survivor saw himself allow a brother's death to escape unscathed. Each illusion was exquisitely real, designed to crack the soul. But none of them broke. They endured the chamber of echoes, where recorded voices of fallen brothers begged them to turn back. They endured the tunnel of seals, where the air thickened with wards meant to crush the soul. They even endured the black flame, a psychic fire that burned away weakness without searing flesh. Day by day, they were reborn. They trained in silence, no names, only designations, 1 through 8. And even that was temporary. They learned to fight not like Space Marines, but like extensions of each other's will, synchronized not by command, but by instinct. Their psychic link, raw at first, was shaped through meditation, forging a bond deeper than brotherhood. One day, one caught a blade meant for 5. No words, just action. Another day, 7 nearly drowned during a simulation in a sealed void tank. 2 held his breath for 13 minutes to pull him out. Malcador watched it all, silent, ever present, testing, judging. Finally, after weeks, he brought them together again in the stone chamber beneath Luna. "You are no longer the 8, he said. "You are one." He gave them no names, no heraldry, but he gave them something greater, purpose. "You will be called when the darkness grows deep, when demons walk, when the veil thins. You will strike like lightning and vanish like ghosts. You are not a chapter. You are not even warriors. You are the edge of the blade." And then he said what none of them expected. "Soon we leave Terra." The shock rippled through them, but none reacted outwardly. They knew what it meant. The siege was coming. They would not be part of it. Their role lay elsewhere. They would not fight for the throne. They would protect the future. The chosen 8 stood as one, ready to abandon the world they had once called home. And in that moment, without ceremony, they ceased to be individuals. They became the seed of the Grey Knights. The siege had begun. Terra groaned under the weight of 1,000 warships, each bearing the icon of betrayal. Above the cradle of humanity, a storm of fire and madness swirled. Horus, the War Master, had come to claim the throne. The loyalist defenders braced themselves for apocalypse, but in the vaults beneath Luna's surface, deeper than even the Mechanicum dared tread, a different war was being waged. A war not of bolter or blade, but of secrecy. It was time to disappear. The Emperor had foreseen this moment. As much as he would bleed atop the Golden Throne to defend mankind's last bastion, he knew that the heresy would not end the true war. Chaos was eternal. Demons would rise again. And even victory at Terra would mean nothing if no one remained to fight the shadows that came after. Thus, the 8 would not be present for the final battle. Their place was elsewhere, beyond Terra, beyond the war, beyond even the knowledge of those who fought in the name of loyalty. This was the Exodus. Malcador gathered the 8 in silence. No words of farewell, no grand declarations. The Emperor did not speak to them again. That meeting had passed, and what had been said there would never be recorded. Instead, in the dead of the night, if night could still be marked on a world wreathed in war, Malcador led them alone through the inner vaults of Luna. There, a hangar sealed by vault wards opened for the first time in centuries. Within stood a vessel unlike any other in Imperial record, sleek, silent, covered in hexagrammatic wards, a ship meant not for war but for passing unseen, the Eidolon Protocol. This vessel had never been charted by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Its machine spirit had been bound by the Emperor himself, sealed with psychic runes and ancient encryption. The Geller field generators thrummed with a frequency unfamiliar even to the most learned tech priests, a custom frequency attuned not just to hold the warp at bay, but to silence it. It did not hum, it whispered. Malcador turned to the 8, cloaked in their gray robes, eyes lit with the reflection of a future not yet born. "You are not fleeing," he said, voice low. "You are being placed beyond reach." He stepped onto the boarding ramp and looked back once. "The galaxy will forget you, but one day it will need you, and on that day you must be ready." The 8 did not hesitate. They boarded the vessel and left behind everything they had ever known. Luna, Terra, their pasts. The Eidolon Protocol lifted into the void with no fanfare, no beacon, no honor guard. Its presence was cloaked not just by its own design, but by psychic illusions woven by Malcador himself. The warp did not see it. The warp could not see it. The ship moved between real space and unreality like a ghost. It did not follow traditional warp routes. Malcador himself, aboard the vessel, bent space with mind and sigil, navigating through backwaters of the Imperium no psyker had dared use since the dark age of technology. He was the Emperor's chosen psyker, not as mighty as his master, but steeped in his trust. He bore with him relics, knowledge, and artifacts, things which must not be lost when Terra burned. The future of humanity, or what could salvage it, was locked in the cargo holds and mind vaults aboard the ship. Among them, the first sacred tomes of demonology, sealed behind psychic wards, fragments of ancient warp theories and forbidden texts from Prospero, the blueprints of psychic circuitry for the armaments that would one day become Nemesis Force weapons, and most precious of all, vials of the Emperor's gene seed. Not a sample, not a derivation, the source. The ship passed unnoticed through the warp. No demons screamed in its path. No corruption touched its walls. Malcador's presence, his mind like a sun in shadow, was enough to mask them from detection. The journey was long. Time moved strangely. Days passed for the 8, sometimes compressed, sometimes stretched. Their thoughts were filled with meditations. Malcador used the time to continue their training, not in the physical arts, but in secrecy. He taught them the mental wards needed to resist demonic intrusion, the chance to quiet a mind at the edge of corruption. He spoke of the warp not as a place of madness, but as a battlefield, one that required discipline, not fear. They listened, they learned, and they began to become something more than Astartes. Eventually, the Eidolon Protocol arrived at its destination, Titan. The moon of Saturn, shrouded in storms and ice, had long been ignored by Imperial cartographers. It held no cities, no known installations. Its atmosphere was thick and choked with ammonia and cryovapors, inhospitable and forgotten, which was exactly what the Emperor intended. But the 8 saw it differently. As the ship descended, the psychic wards cloaking Titan's surface flickered, briefly revealing the outline of a fortress monastery buried beneath the surface ice. It had been built in secret long before the heresy, by laborers who never returned and locked away by stasis fields and warp shielding. A contingency within a contingency. Even the Primarchs did not know it existed. Titan was not merely a hiding place. It was a womb. The ship landed in the inner sanctum, a vast hangar cut into solid rock, glowing faintly with protective runes. As the 8 stepped onto the surface, something subtle shifted in the warp. Titan knew them, or rather, the protections laid into the moon's crust had been attuned to their essence. The fortress accepted them. At Malcador's word, the stasis vaults opened. Ancient machinery shuddered to life for the first time in centuries. Forges, libraries, training halls, gene laboratories, all hidden beneath the ice, buried in a network so complex it could not be mapped by cogitators. There were even chambers of silence, zones where the warp did not function. Not as null space, but something more refined. Harmonic dampeners that muted all psychic interference. Here they would practice not just resisting demons, but fighting them in silence. The 8 began exploring the fortress. Each step they took deepened the bond between them and the place. They found weapons still sealed in vaults, bearing the Emperor's personal sigils. Armor unlike anything they had worn, lighter, more refined, etched with runes instead of legion markings. They were still not a chapter. Not yet. But they had found their home. Malcador remained for 3 weeks. He walked with the 8 through the deepest levels, showing them how to activate the teleportarium network, how to access the Librarium Demonica, and how to commune with the defenses, psychic barriers so advanced that even demons would falter trying to pierce them. He showed them the reliquary, where ancient texts written in High Gothic and forgotten dialects were stored behind vaults of adamantium. Some of these books had been written by the Emperor himself. He left them then with no ceremony, just as he had led them from Luna. He returned to Terra for the last time to stand beside the Emperor during the siege. And the 8 were alone, but not truly. Titan breathed around them. The fortress had waited an eternity for them, and in that frozen silence, the foundation of a new brotherhood began to settle into place. They were not ghosts, not myths. They were real, and in the shadows of Saturn, beyond the gaze of traitors and heroes alike, they began the final journey of becoming the Emperor's secret sons. The exodus was complete. The war would rage on Terra, but the future had already escaped. Titan was a tomb when they arrived, silent, cold, ancient. It lay suspended between myth and oblivion, drifting in the shadow of Saturn like a ghost, yet to find its grave. The warp had touched this place once, long ago during its preparation, and then been violently pushed away. The very ground was laced with sacred sigils, etched by hands now dust, their purpose unknowable to any, save perhaps the Emperor and Malcador themselves. But to the 8, it was not a tomb. It was a crucible. The Eidolon protocol departed without ceremony, its machine spirit bound for void lanes that no chart ever recorded. Malcador was gone, his presence like a dream fading from their psychic senses. Terra was burning behind them, and the galaxy trembled beneath the shadow of the Eye of Terror. Yet here, in the heart of Saturn's icy satellite, the 8 stood still, stripped of past, prepared for transformation. They had left as space marines. They would become something else entirely. The fortress monastery that greeted them was not merely old, it was alien, even to their transhuman senses. The architecture shifted subtly, as though it had been constructed in layered dimensions. Hallways did not lead where they should. Vaults pulsed with power unseen, yet profoundly felt. Shadows gathered in corners where there were no light sources to cast them. But the 8 were not afraid. They had walked through worse. Their first act on Titan was to awaken it. Within the central sanctum, beneath a cyclopean hexagram etched into the floor with molten gold, they placed their hands upon a slab of obsidian. It pulsed once, then again, and then the fortress stirred. Lights ignited across the ceiling, but they did not shine. They glowed, casting no shadows. Vox relays hummed to life, their messages in a language older than Gothic. Defensive systems uncoiled from their resting tombs, scenting the psychic resonance of the Eight and marking them as kin. The air grew warmer, barely perceptible, like breath returning to a corpse. The fortress knew its masters had arrived, and so the training began. They were alone now, no Malcador, no tutors, no Terran handlers. Only the Eight and the relics left behind for their transformation. The Crucible, as they would call it, was not a process of simple martial training. They were already post-human warriors, Astartes whose combat prowess exceeded all but the most elite soldiers in the galaxy. No, this was a forging of something rarer, the marriage of mind and soul in defiance of the warp. Each was led, on the first day, to a chamber of silence. It was not quiet. It was utterly devoid of all sound, all thought, all psychic echo. It suppressed identity. Inside, they meditated or tried to. But what they found was not peace. It was their own mind, laid bare, screaming into the void for definition. They faced who they had been, not through memory, for those were locked away, but through instinct. One of them emerged covered in blood. Not his own. He said nothing. Another took 3 days to come out. When he did, his eyes no longer blinked in unison. He would later lead a squad that could sense warp intrusions before they occurred. After the chamber came the flames, not fire as we know it, but a psychoreactive energy field created in the heart of Titan's inner sanctum. Known as the Pyra Obscura, it was thought to have been gifted by the Emperor himself, or perhaps drawn from the black ships of the earliest Inquisitors. Its light burned corruption, even potential corruption. They stepped into it naked, unshielded. The flames judged them. Most survived. One did not. The 8 became 7. No screams were heard, only ash remained. A perfect circle scattered by the winds of the ventilation systems, as though even the fortress grieved in silence. The 7 never spoke of him again. His name, like all names before, was lost. Next came the codices. Not of strategy or warfare, but of souls. In a vault marked only by a symbol too complex for human eyes, they found scrolls penned in what could only be described as thought images. Ideas imprinted upon psychic-sensitive parchment that could only be read by opening one's mind fully. These were the codices Demonica, texts not to inform, but to shape. To read them was to confront madness distilled, the true names of demons, the hierarchies of the warp, the principles of counterpossession and soul-binding. Each of the 7 chose one scroll, at random, and meditated upon it for 7 days. Some wept, some bled. One was found levitating 3 inches above the ground, humming in a tone that resonated with the rune wards of the fortress. They had seen the warp for what it was, not evil, but entropy. Not temptation, but hunger. And they vowed to become the weapon that would hold it at bay. Titan did not feed them as other fortresses would. The mess halls were abandoned, the protein fabricators inactive. Instead, nutrition came in the form of alchemical paste, sealed in phials inscribed with ritual purity glyphs. They consumed it without complaint, for they understood. What they ate was as much spiritual fuel as it was sustenance. Each phial had been blessed. Some said they had been consecrated by the Emperor himself. Their training in arms resumed, but differently. Gone were chain blades and bolt rifles. Instead, they practiced with staffs inscribed with runes, blades laced with silver, and hammers that required not just strength to lift, but will. The Nemesis weapons had begun to awaken. Each weapon responded to only one of them. resonating with psychic frequency, as if choosing its bearer. When touched by the wrong hands, the weapons grew cold, unusable, but in the hands of the chosen, they sang. Their armor, too, was different. No colored heraldry, no chapter badges, just silver. Pure, gleaming, unornamented, like moonlight shaped into form. The armor resisted demonic influence not through material alone, but through psychic harmonization. It was armor not just of war, but of purpose. When the Seven first wore it, the fortress itself responded. Wards flared to life across Titan's crust, sending pulses through the substrata. Ice cracked, vault doors hissed open, lightning danced through the warped null chambers. The fortress monastery had accepted them, not as guests, not as initiates, but as its true sons. Then came the final trial. Each was sent alone into the deep vaults, a region of Titan even Malcador had rarely entered. What they found there, only they know. None ever spoke of it. But they returned changed, eyes colder, posture straighter, minds quieter. They emerged from the crucible not as remnants of the legions, not as warriors lost to time, but as the first of a new breed, the Emperor's own. And as they knelt in the central sanctum one final time, the fortress itself echoed with a voice, not spoken aloud, but felt in every atom of their being. A name, not one given by man, but by the mission. Grey Knights. And the stars, cold and watchful, bore silent witness as the first and only demonic nemesis of the Imperium was born. Beneath the frozen surface of Titan, where no starlight could reach and no mortal eye would dare gaze, the last wards were being sealed. The fortress monastery, now awakened and alive, was not merely a bastion of stone and steel. It was a construct of immense psychic architecture, a structure folded into the warp and anchored in reality by a lattice of runes that defied comprehension. Every corridor hummed with silent vigilance. Every chamber bore inscriptions not meant to be read, but felt. These were not the marks of men. These were the sigils of the Emperor. The Crucible had forged the Seven into something new, but their transformation was incomplete. They were still tethered to the past by the simple fact of being known, by Malcador, by the Emperor, even by the shadows of their old selves. To become truly invisible to the galaxy, they had to vanish from everything, from time, from space, from the sight of gods. That final stage of their creation would require a sacrifice not of blood, but of presence. Titan had to be erased, not physically, but cosmically. And so the Emperor's last command, delivered to Malcador before his final walk to the Golden Throne, was enacted. A ritual unlike any performed before or since, the Great Warding. Deep in the central sanctum, within the hexagrammaton vault, the Seven stood at the vertices of a colossal rune inscribed into the floor. Above them, suspended in gravity-defying arcs of silver and obsidian, hovered 7 relics, artifacts drawn from the ancient vaults of Terra. Not weapons, but anchors of meaning. The crown of a martyred saint, a data slot containing the names of every fallen loyalist at Istvan V, a lock of hair from a navigator who had charted the impossible, a blade that had never been drawn, a stone from the Emperor's own meditation chamber, a ring that had belonged to Malcador, and a tiny, flawless crystal containing a single psychic echo, the Emperor's final whisper to his Sigillite. Each object pulsed with a power not their own. Each radiated quiet defiance. Around them, the fortress braced itself. Vaults locked, shields engaged, the stasis engines thrummed, drawing power not from plasma or reactor core, but from the warp itself, inverted and repelled by the force of will contained within the runes. The ritual required more than technology. It required belief. The Seven did not speak. They knelt, their minds linked in a circle of psychic harmony, the helix of the Emperor's gene seed burning like starlight in their blood. Then the chanting began, not aloud but in unison thought, a song without words. The fortress responded. From the outer crust of Titan to the innermost sanctum, the very moon began to disappear, not physically but psychically. Its presence faded from the warp like a shadow pulled into a deeper black. Beacons on Luna could no longer detect it. Astronomical charts began showing a void where Titan had once been, as if the moon had never existed. And most significantly, the powers of the Imperium, demons, sorcerers, the warp-born intelligences that screamed across the void, lost all sense of it. Titan became the hidden Aegis, a bastion not just of secrecy, but of unknowability. This was not a cloaking field, not invisibility. This was non-existence, a place conceptually severed from reality, held in a state of liminal suspension, there and not there. The rituals, codified only once, required the will of the Emperor, the mind of the Sigillite, and the presence of his 7 chosen sons. And when it was done, the galaxy shifted. It did not notice. That was the point. But the warp recoiled. For the first time, a fortress had been raised that no demon could smell, no sorcerer could scry, no psychic malice could touch. The 7 had not merely found a home. They had become its soul. In the wake of the ritual, the fortress changed once more. Its halls echoed with new resonance. Machines that had lain dormant for millennia activated. The Librarium Demonica, once sealed, opened its gates. The vaults within were lined not with data scrolls or cogitators, but with living memory. Ghosts of the Emperor's earliest campaigns, psychic projections of malice captured and imprisoned. The walls themselves whispered histories that could not be written. The 7 were granted access to only a fraction, and that was enough to reshape them again. The Nemesis weapons, forged in the stillness of the Hall of Reflection, now took final form. Each blade, hammer, halberd, and stave had been forged not just from metal, but from vision. The artisans who made them, long since faded into legend, had not merely constructed arms. They had built concepts into steel. Each weapon was a mirror held up to the warp, a channel of the Emperor's will. They burned not with fire, but with truth. When the 7 first raised them in unison, the fortress's defenses surged with psychic energy. The very crust of Titan, its surface veiled in ice, glimmered briefly with runes that could only be seen by those born of the Emperor's seed. The runes marked Titan as warded ground, as if to declare, "No demon shall pass." It was not enough to be hidden, they had to be ready, and so their training intensified, not in isolation but as a choir. Unlike any other Space Marines, the 7 learned to fight as extensions of a singular mind. Their psychic link was honed to razor precision. In battle simulations conducted within warp-mimicking enclosures, they responded to threats not with orders, but with instinct. When one moved, the others adjusted. When one faltered, another compensated. They were not a squad. They were a weapon. Each of them was taught to pilot the teleportation systems embedded in the deepest vaults. These were not crude devices. They were keyed to runes, targeted by memory, and shielded by protective fields that allowed for instantaneous insertion into psychic hotspots. They practiced teleport strikes into dimensional rifts, purging simulated warp entities with sanctified flame and blade. No target was ever just killed. It was banished, obliterated from existence. The rites of exorcism were memorized. The Canticle of Binding was recited in 8 variations, one for each of the 7, and one for the soul they had lost in the Crucible. Every Grey Knight would carry these rites embedded into their armor, their weapons, their memories. And the armor, they were now clad in its full form, silver, gleaming. Not for vanity, but as a reflection of the light no demon could abide, no heraldry, no laurels, only purity. The sigils etched across its surface had no translation. They were expressions of intent drawn from pre-human scripts encoded in the Emperor's mind. Even the helmets were designed not to intimidate, but to protect the soul. In full armor, a Grey Knight became a moving bastion of the Emperor's will, anathema to corruption. And still, Titan changed. As they trained, meditated, and attuned themselves to the warpless quiet of the fortress, the seven felt it. The sense that something was growing. Not a threat, not a corruption, but a presence, a waiting. The fortress was not merely shelter, it was preparation. They understood then what Malcador had meant, why they had been brought here, why they had been erased from history. This was not a chapter, this was not even a legion. This was the Emperor's answer to the true war, the war that had not yet begun. A war not for worlds or empires, but for souls, and they would be its wardens. The Grey Knights did not raise their banners, they did not write oaths in record, but every step they took upon Titan's rune-carved stone, every word they uttered in silence, every hour spent meditating beneath the hall of ether glass, strengthened the shield they had become, the hidden Aegis, the last ward of the Emperor, and the first light to shine when darkness fell again. Titan did not sleep. Even when the stars wheeled unseen above its frozen skies and the void fell silent around its orbit, the fortress monastery beneath its crust remained alive with purpose. Within its halls, lit by ghost lanterns and runes that pulsed like heartbeats, knowledge stirred, restless, ancient, forbidden. This was no mere archive, no librarium as understood by any Imperial scholar or Astartes chapter. The Sanctum of Secrets was not a library, it was a vault, a labyrinth, a prison. And the Grey Knights were its jailers. There are things the Imperium does not know it knows. Dark truths buried for fear of contagion, heresies too dangerous to even name, and lore so potent that a single paragraph might unravel a mind. This knowledge had to be kept, somewhere, not destroyed, for to destroy is to forget, and forgetting is a luxury mankind can ill afford. So Malcador had preserved it. With the Emperor's sanction, he had taken tomes, artifacts, and esoteric mechanisms from the darkest corners of human history, and hidden them here, beneath Titan's skin. He had crafted a vault that not only secured these horrors, but actively suppressed them. The sanctum was buried at the heart of the fortress, guarded by 15 gates, each one sealed by a different rite: technomantic, psychic, sacramental, and runic. To open even the first required a confluence of three things: an encoded gene print from the Emperor's seed, a soul untainted by warp touch, and the spoken name of one of the seven. Not a true name, of course. Those had long since been erased. But within the silence of Titan, each knight had been given a new identifier. These were not call signs or designations. They were wards, each syllable a psychic keystone, each name a sigil designed to bind reality to will. Together, the seven opened the vault. Within, the air was wrong. Not hostile, but tense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, as if the knowledge contained within was aware, restrained, but watching. The Sanctum of Secrets did not categorize its contents by chronology or subject. There was no logic, only containment. A journal kept by a rogue navigator who had stared into the eye of terror and survived, but wrote his memoirs in blood, 1 page per night, as if something were feeding on his thoughts. A fist-sized sphere of polished obsidian, its surface smooth and flawless. Yet every Grey Knight who gazed into it saw a different reflection. None of them their own. Tomes bound in flesh, ciphers scrawled in code that only psychically active minds could interpret. Dream recordings from telepaths who had died screaming, transcribed onto crystalline hololiths that whispered in the quietest corners of the sanctum. An ancient coin from pre-Unity Terra that radiated warp energy stronger than a sorcerer's blade. The seven walked among them not as scholars, but as guardians. They were not to study. They were to watch. Malcador's last instruction had been clear. The day may come when you must use what is locked within. But until that day, your duty is not to understand it. Your duty is to ensure no one else ever does. And so the Grey Knights trained not only in battle, but in containment. Each day, one of them would enter the sanctum alone, meditating within its walls, allowing the ambient psychic pressure to test their mind's resolve. It was a rite as dangerous as combat. There were no simulations here, no armor or aegis to shield them. Only silence, the darkness between pages, and the slow, subtle pull of forbidden truth. One nearly lost himself. He emerged after 12 hours, staggering, speaking in an ancient dialect known only to the Emperor's earliest gene laboratories. His eyes glowed faintly. His fingers trembled in perfect rhythm to an unknown melody. The others surrounded him, blades drawn, not in anger but in vigilance. He knelt, placed a single palm to the stone floor, and said only, "I saw too much." And then he wept. Not from fear, from gratitude, because he had come back. From that day forward, they added a new rite. Each night, after entering the sanctum, would undergo a cleansing of echoes, a psychic exorcism performed not by force, but by harmony, each of the seven attuning their minds to the returning brother, surrounding him with the mental resonance of unity, silencing whatever voices may have clung to his soul. It was not enough to be strong. They had to be whole. They had to be unbreakable. For the sanctum held things that might break gods. In the deepest alcove, beyond even the central vault, there existed a sealed chamber known only as the Silent Room. No record explained its contents. No key could open it. It was not locked by code or force or ritual. It was locked by absence. Inside it, there was no warp resonance, no heat, no psychic feedback, no pressure. The Grey Knights could not sense it with their minds, nor perceive it with their enhanced eyes. It was a blank, a nothing, so total it felt unnatural. Whatever lay inside the Silent Room was not merely secret, it was a thing that did not belong. The seven were forbidden to approach it, and none ever did. But its presence remained, an unanswered question that hummed quietly beneath their training, their rituals, their meditations. The Sanctum of Secrets changed them, not by teaching, but by reminding that for every battle fought in the material realm, there were wars waged in silence, that not all victories came with banners or blades. Some came with refusal, some came with the courage to not open a door. Outside the sanctum, the fortress expanded. A forge was constructed, small, personal, guarded by prayer machines. Not to craft new weapons, but to maintain the sacred arms already issued. Each Grey Knight was taught the art of sanctification, how to etch fresh wards into armor, how to realign a blade's psychic field after exposure to demonic essence, how to chant the litanies of ether binding while oiling the joints of a gauntlet. They were not merely warriors, they were custodians of weapons, of wisdom, of warning. Because the truth, above all else, was this: the Grey Knights were not meant to win wars, they were meant to prevent worse ones. Every book locked within the sanctum was a door, every relic a window, and the seven had been chosen to stand before them, not to gaze through, but to block the light lest it shine where it was never meant to fall. In time, more warriors would come, more would be tested, more would kneel before the codices demonica and take up the nemesis blade. But none would ever be the first, and the seven, bound by the secrets they protected, would watch over Titan not as lords, but as guardians of forbidden fire. They would read the unreadable, seal the unsealable, and in doing so become the Imperium's last, best defense, not against the demons that raged in blood and fury, but against the ideas that summoned them in the first place. They were the Grey Knights, and the Sanctum was their crucible of silence. There was no clang of hammers in Titan's forge, no ringing anvil to echo down stone halls, no sparks to dance across darkened ceilings. This was not the forge of a mortal world. It was a place of silence, of ritual, of transformation. The forge of purity, buried deep within the sublevels of the Grey Knights' fortress monastery, was unlike any manufactorum in the Imperium. It did not churn with industry. It did not belch smoke or grind metal beneath vast cogitator arms. There were no servitors chained to tasks, no tech priests chanting litanies of function and fire. Here, weapons were not built. They were consecrated, and those who bore them, those few and chosen, were not craftsmen. They were celebrants. The seven entered the forge only after months of silence, study, and psychic tempering. Their minds had been purged of old loyalties, their souls screened by ritual, their bodies refined by the Emperor's own gene seed. But to wield a weapon forged in the forge of purity, they had to prove one final thing: that they understood what it meant to kill a demon. It is not enough to destroy a demon's form. To strike one down in battle is no victory, for it will simply reform in the warp, gleeful, patient, and vengeful. A demon, to be truly slain, must be banished in spirit. It must be unmade, stripped of name and presence, its essence flayed from the warp like smoke in the wind. To do this requires more than strength, more than speed or precision. It requires a weapon attuned to a higher truth. In the forge of purity, that truth was fire, not physical flame, but psychic conflagration. The forge's core was a contained wellspring of warp light, trapped inside a prism of anti-reality constructed from void stone mined in pre-imperial times. This flame did not consume in the normal sense. It burned lies. It stripped things of delusion. It incinerated the warp's illusions and left only that which could not be twisted. It was the Emperor's truth, made manifest. And to forge weapons within it, the Grey Knights had to lay themselves upon its threshold. Each of the seven was tasked with crafting a single blade, not a relic passed down, not a gift from an artificer, a weapon of their own mind, their own choosing. They began with silence. Meditation in the Hall of Forging, surrounded by psychically resonant sigils that pulsed in rhythm with their breath. There they fasted for 3 days. No food, no water, no light, only the sound of their own thoughts and the whisper of the forge flame far below. On the 4th day they descended. They found no furnace, no bellows, only a pool of silver fire hovering in suspension, neither liquid nor flame. Beneath it, a platform of polished obsidian, perfectly circular, carved with the 13 wards of demon warding designed by Malcador himself. Here the knight would kneel, remove his gauntlets, and place both hands, unarmored, into the psychic flame. Pain followed, but not the pain of nerves or flesh. It was soul pain, every unspoken doubt, every flicker of pride, every buried grief or shame. The fire revealed them all. Not in words, but in revelation. The knight would relive moments of failure not even his conscious mind had registered. He would hear the voices of demons, not mocking, but seductive. They would offer him release, rest, recognition. He would deny them, and the forge would judge him worthy. Only then did the real crafting begin. The weapons forged in Titan's sanctified fires were not mass-produced. They were bespoke, singular, bound to the will of the warrior who shaped them. Some chose swords, long, narrow blades etched with runes that glowed only in the presence of the warp. Others forged halberds, two-handed staves of ceramite alloy and hexagrammic steel, crowned with psychic amplifiers and shaped to pierce not just flesh, but thought. One crafted a hammer, massive, blunt, its head hollow and filled with blessed oils that would explode upon impact, sanctifying the air around each blow. Another crafted a glaive that curved like a crescent moon, its edge sharpened not with grinding stones, but with the recitation of the Emperor's true name, spoken in High Gothic backwards 100 times in a voice stripped of ego. These were not weapons. They were statements, and each was engraved not with the wielder's name, but a singular word, not in any known language, just an idea. One read, denial; another, silence; a third, witness. Each blade was a psychic mirror, reflecting not the warrior's strength, but his purity. Only he could wield it. Only he could draw out its true power. When the weapons were complete, they were plunged, briefly, into the forge's flame. The silver fire hissed, the runes upon the blades shone. For a single instant, each weapon became realer than reality, resonating with a clarity that shook the very walls. The fortress acknowledged them, and the knights who bore them were changed. From that moment on, they would never fight with another's weapon. Even should one of them fall, his blade would be locked in a sealed shrine, unused, untouched, for its bond could never be passed. Armor came next. The forge supplied not only weapons, but the second skin each knight would wear into battle for the rest of his life. The suits were relics from a forgotten age, untouched by Mechanicus dogma. Each suit of power armor was constructed of ceramite and hexagrammic plating, but that was only the beginning. The interior was lined with silver filaments tuned to the wearer's psychic field. They didn't merely shield against the warp, they rejected it. Every plate was inscribed by hand, not once, but thrice. Once by the knight himself, each stroke carved in meditation. Once by his brethren, blessing each line with their silent witness, and once by the forge itself, an arcane mechanism that left behind no mark visible to the eye, but whose presence could be felt whenever a demon drew near. The final piece was the Aegis, a psychic shroud woven into the armor's circuitry, tuned to the mental resonance of the Grey Knight's psychic chorus. When active, it projected not a shield, but a denial, a zone of purity, a zone where lies unravel, illusions burn, and the touch of the warp falters. The Aegis was not just protection. It was a declaration. We do not belong to your world. No other Astartes possessed such a thing. Not the Ultramarines, not the Dark Angels, not even the Custodes. The Aegis was born from the Emperor's own designs, and could only be sustained by the purity of his chosen. When the seven stood together in full warplate, weapons in hand, the fortress acknowledged them once more. The walls sang, softly, tonelessly, a harmonic pulse that moved through stone and memory alike. From that day on, they were no longer students, no longer candidates. They were knights, but not of renown, not of lineage, not of heraldry or chapter. They were gray, they were pure, and from the forge of purity, they emerged ready to face the one foe that could not be killed with strength alone, the warp. It was the one vow never recorded, never written down. No imperial scribe etched its words into parchment. No remembrancer painted its meaning in oils. No Mechanicus archive registered the day it was sworn. But the oath of silence, uttered by the first 7 Grey Knights in the hollow heart of Titan, remains the most sacred, most binding vow in the history of the Imperium. Because it wasn't just an oath of secrecy, it was an oath of purpose. The moment had been prepared since their arrival, since before their rebirth, before the forging of their arms, before the Emperor's gene seed stirred in their veins. Everything they had done, endured, survived, it had all led to this moment of choice. Not compulsion, choice. The ritual took place in a chamber beneath even the Forge of Purity, a place no one spoke of, accessed only once in a Grey Knight's life. Not even the future Grand Masters would enter it again. It was simply called the Nullum, the Nothing. The path to the Nullum was lined with statues, not of heroes or saints, but of the forgotten, faceless figures standing in silence, carved from gray-veined stone that seemed to drink the light. The walls bore no sigils, no banners, only emptiness. No sounds followed them down the steps, not the whisper of breath, not the hiss of armor. Even thought in that descent became distant, stripped away by the wards carved into the very bedrock. By the time they reached the threshold, the seven had been hollowed. Still themselves, but on the edge of something greater. Inside the Nullum, there was no floor, only a smooth black plane, featureless, lightless, reflecting nothing. Here, reality frayed, no warp, no connection to the throne, no psychic resonance at all, just choice. They stood in a circle, weapons sheathed, armor dimmed. In the center, a brazier unlit. A single match lay at its base, a relic, anachronistic and small, its wooden shaft painted white, its tip a sliver of soft crimson. It had been placed there centuries before the heresy, waiting. Malcador himself had spoken of it once. The greatest decisions are made not in glory, but in stillness, not with war horns, but with silence. The match was not symbolic, it was the ritual. Each knight would step forward, strike it, and light the flame. Then, with the fire reflecting in his eyes, he would speak only one sentence, not chosen beforehand, not rehearsed, just spoken. A final declaration of will, of who he was, and what he now pledged to become. The first of the seven stepped forward. He picked up the match with bare fingers, struck it against the side of the brazier. The flame bloomed, not orange, not yellow, but white with the barest halo of silver. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, as if it hadn't been used in days. I will be the hand that does not tremble. He dropped the match into the coals. The flame spread slowly, lighting nothing around it, yet illuminating the air itself. The second stepped forward. I give myself to the silence between screams. A breath, a pause. The third, I will not be remembered. I will not be missed, and that is how I will save them. One by one, they added their voices to the growing flame. I bind my soul not to victory, but to vigilance. My name is lost. My purpose is eternal. I serve not to fight, but to stand between. And the last of them, the tallest, who had not spoken in days, not even in meditation, bowed his head before he whispered, I am not the sword. I am the hand that holds it, and the will that does not let it fall. With the seventh oath, the flame flared brighter, washing over the brazier without burning it. The chamber pulsed with unspoken energy. The oath had been made, not to one another, not to the Emperor, but to the Imperium's soul, to everything worth protecting, even if it could never know they existed. This was the final transformation, not one of body, not even of spirit, but of identity. Until now, they had been training, preparing, becoming. Now they simply were. There would be no announcements, no laurels placed upon their shoulders, no titles granted. Even their names, what few designations they used, would be locked away, known only to their closest brothers. Their lives from this moment on would be invisible. If they succeeded, they would be erased. If they failed, the Imperium would never know who they had been. That was the price of purity, but it was a price they welcomed. From that day forward, the Grey Knights would not speak of themselves. They would not ask about each other's pasts. Not out of coldness, but because to dwell on what had been was to invite the very corruption they existed to prevent. Instead, they spoke through deeds, through oaths, through silence. The Oath of Silence became more than a ritual. It became a philosophy. When a new initiate was brought to Titan after centuries of secrecy, when the Seven began the process of extending the Order, they would not be greeted. No one would say his name. No voices would fill the halls. Only the silent presence of those who watched, who judged, who measured not by words, but by will. And if that initiate passed his trials, if he proved himself pure enough to walk the path of silver, then and only then would he be led to the Nullum, to add his voice, one sentence, to the oath that stretched across centuries, a sentence never recorded, never remembered, but carried in flame and silence by every Grey Knight who would ever live. This was what separated them from the chapters, from the legions, from every other servant of the Emperor's cause. Space Marines were warriors, but the Grey Knights were witnesses. They stood before the warp not as conquerors, not as crusaders, but as the final boundary, the last truth, the silent line that chaos would never cross. They needed no applause, no banners, no remembrance, only this, that they had sworn the oath, and that nothing, not demon, not temptation, not time itself, would ever cause them to break it. They were born from silence. They fought in silence. And in the end, when their time came, they would die without a word. Before a Grey Knight lifts his sword, before a bolter is loaded, before the first incantation leaves a warrior's lips, there is silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of thought, honed into a weapon sharper than any blade. Because before they are knights, before they are space marines, before they are warriors of the Emperor's will, they are minds of unyielding purpose. It is here, in the deepest corners of Titan's fortress monastery, not among the forges or armories, but within the meditation chambers carved from soulstone and psychoreactive crystal, that the true war begins. Not against flesh, not against demons, but against the self. This was the foundation of their power. Discipline. Not obedience, not submission, not the discipline of soldiers marching in rank or servitors following code. Mental discipline. The utter, ruthless mastery of every thought, every impulse, every weakness. Because to face the warp is to be seen, not as you present yourself, but as you are. Chaos does not merely test the body. It does not simply confront the will. It reflects, it tempts, it magnifies. One whisper of pride and Khorne will drown you in bloodlust. One flicker of doubt and Tzeentch will unravel your soul. One moment of despair and Nurgle will offer you comfort in rot. One hidden desire and Slaanesh will promise you eternity. So the Grey Knights train their minds as if they were blades, edges honed on the whetstone of focus, purpose, and truth. The training begins in the chambers of stillness. These are not rooms, but sensory voids, sealed spheres suspended in gravity nullification fields, lined with black velvet laced with anti-psychic alloys. When a novice enters, all sensation is cut off. No sight, no sound, no weight, no warmth, only their own mind. Here they confront the voices, not demonic, not yet, but their own. The fragments of who they were, the echoes of pride, fear, longing, guilt. Some hear the screams of brothers left behind during the heresy. Some see the faces of those they failed to save. Some remember things that were supposed to be erased. Names, banners, legion colors long struck from the record. These thoughts must be faced, not buried, not silenced, faced. Every initiate must remain within the void for 3 days. No food, no water, only the occasional pulse of psychic pressure from the room's core to simulate intrusion. They do not leave when the time is up. They leave when they have wrestled their thoughts into stillness. The first time a novice emerged too early, disoriented and hallucinating, the Seven watched him in silence. They did not chastise. They did not scold. They simply pointed back to the sphere. He entered again. This time, he did not leave for 6 days. When he finally emerged, he did not speak for another 3, but he had learned. Next comes the Litany of Untruth. This rite is performed in the Hall of Echoes, where hundreds of whispers, recorded from the mouths of fallen heretics, corrupted psykers, and even demons, play in a ceaseless stream. These are not obvious lies, not crude temptations. These are half-truths, justifications, doubts. The initiate walks through the hall reciting a personal mantra, not aloud but mentally, shielding himself from the intrusions. The more advanced the initiate, the longer the mantra becomes. Some memorize passages from the Book of the Emperor's Will. Others compose their own litanies, lines shaped from lessons carved into their very psyche. But the truth is this: the litany is not meant to block the whispers. It is meant to endure them, to feel their temptation, to understand the seduction, and still say no. There is a story among the Grey Knights, never confirmed, never denied, of one brother who walked the Hall of Echoes without reciting a mantra at all. He did not speak. He did not resist. He listened, and he smiled. They say the hall fell silent for a moment. They say it feared him. Beyond that test lies the most grueling of all, the mind's crucible. This rite is reserved for those chosen to lead, for future justicars, grand masters, and supreme librarians. It is not undertaken lightly. In the mind's crucible, a subject is placed within a chamber lined with null matter and exposed to a carefully measured psychic stimulus, an artificial presence that mimics the psychic pressure of a demon prince. Not in appearance, not as a vision, but in intensity. The pressure is suffocating, crushing, like standing beneath the weight of a dying star. The subject's thoughts begin to fracture. Their memories unravel. Identity becomes fluid. To survive the crucible is not to endure. It is to rebuild oneself under pressure, to reforge the mind not as it was, but as it must be. There are no screams in the crucible, only breathing and silence. Those who pass do not speak of what they saw. They do not need to. Their eyes speak for them. Beyond these rites, every Grey Knight spends hours each day in quiet alignment, a form of psychic meditation where the mind is cleared, then recentered on the Emperor's presence. They do not worship in the conventional sense. The Emperor is not a god to them, but a flame, a light of reason in a sea of madness. Their reverence is not based in faith. It is based in clarity. He is the one uncorrupted will in all creation, and they are his echo. This is why no Grey Knight has ever fallen, not because of armor, not because of training, but because they have learned to know themselves so completely that there is no foothold left for corruption. There is no pride, only purpose, no ambition, only duty, no desire, only will. And in this discipline, they do not merely protect themselves, they become weapons that the warp cannot comprehend. In battle, a Grey Knight moves like thought given form, not reacting but anticipating. Their psychic link with one another allows squads to coordinate without speech. When one falls, the rest feel it, not as panic, but as calculation. Even in the heart of a demonic incursion, when the air screams and reality tears like paper, a Grey Knight does not lose focus. His mind is not a candle to be snuffed out. It is a star, burning, unshakable, disciplined. And when a Grey Knight dies, it is not in rage, it is not in fear, it is in purpose. The final breath, not a gasp, but a prayer of alignment, sending his essence back into the Emperor's light. Discipline, then, is not their shield. It is their essence. It is what makes them incorruptible. It is what makes them grey. before the Grey Knights had names, before their blades were swung in fury, before a single demon was banished by their hand, there came a knock, not a literal one, not upon the gate of Titan, which bore no door for mortal visitors, but upon the hidden psychic threshold that only the High Ordo knew how to breach, a signal encoded in ancient cipher, riding the warp not as a scream but as a whisper. A single phrase sent from the far reaches of the Imperium to Titan's soul-bound sentinels. The veil thins. It came from the Inquisition, from a mind cloaked in fire and iron, wielding authority no lord could question, an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus. And thus began the first test, not of purity, not of discipline, not of power, but of allegiance. The Grey Knights did not belong to any chapter. No Primarch had claimed them. No Gene Council had ratified their existence. They were born from secrecy, clad in silence, and shaped to face threats even the Imperium itself refused to name. But secrecy comes at a price, and that price is trust. So now, for the first time since the warding of Titan, the Grey Knights stood before another servant of the Emperor. Not a warrior, not a fellow Astartes, but a man, or something like a man, robed in sigils and sanction, bearing the rosette of authority carved from obsidian and bloodstone. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. His words were not a request. "I have need of a weapon." He did not flinch when the seven circled him, silent and motionless in their argent armor. He did not tremble when their eyes, aglow with psychic focus, scanned his mind, not to read it, but to weigh its intent. He merely waited. And when they stepped back, when they acknowledged the ancient pact encoded in the depths of the Librarium Daemonica, the Inquisitor nodded. He knew they had not chosen him. They had chosen the mission. This was the second truth of the Grey Knights. Their service was not only to the Emperor, but to his purpose. And that purpose was carried not by armies, but by firebrands, agents like this Inquisitor, who wandered the stars not to rule, but to prevent ruin. The Ordo Malleus had been shaped for one task alone, to seek and destroy the demon, wherever it might slither into reality. But knowledge of such creatures, of warp entities, of possession of blasphemous rites, was forbidden to all but the Inquisition's most elite. Thus, when the Inquisitor called, the Grey Knights answered, not as soldiers, but as the blade of the Inquisition, the Inquisitor's sword. Their relationship was unlike any other in the Imperium. They did not serve the Inquisitor as warriors served a general. They were not commanded, drilled, or assigned. They were requested, and should that request prove tainted or motivated by personal ambition rather than the Emperor's will, the Inquisitor would not receive assistance. He would receive judgment. This balance of power, built on mutual respect and apocalyptic necessity, forged a bond that was both rigid and fluid. Inquisitors brought knowledge, warnings of rising cults, signs of warp taint, planetary anomalies that spoke of demonic infestation. The Grey Knights brought the fire to purge it. But even then, not always. The Seven did not leap to every call. They debated silently in the Hall of Oaths, where no light entered and decisions were made not by words, but by the binding of thought. They weighed the necessity, the clarity, the truth. For the worst thing the Grey Knights could do was act on a lie, and in the matter of demons, lies were more common than truth. Some Inquisitors called upon them out of fear, seeing shadows where there were only embers. Some called in desperation, seeking salvation where none could be offered. Others called in ambition, hoping to harness the demon's fire through the Knight's blade. Only when the cause was pure would the Grey Knights depart. Their first departure from Titan was not in a fleet. Not with banners or fanfare, just a single strike cruiser, unseen verdict, its hull inscribed with no sigils, its warp trail cloaked by ancient tech drawn from the Dark Age. Its arrival at the target world, Pelennor 4, a quiet agri-colony on the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, was silent. There had been no confirmed demon sighting, only dreams, a rising number of suicides, children born with eyes that glowed in the dark, livestock bleeding dry, their bodies unharmed. A single astropath had cried out, "The door is opening," and then died, her mind eaten from within. The Inquisitor had seen the pattern, and the Grey Knights had agreed. The veil was thinning, the strike force deployed not from orbit, but through teleportation, each knight arriving as a pillar of argent light, cast from the heavens into the heart of the world. They made no speeches, they offered no comfort. They moved through the silent fields like reapers, scanning, watching, listening. At the center of the largest settlement, they found it. Not a demon, not a cult, but a book, just one, bound in cloth, pages made of parchment, hidden beneath the floorboards of the old chapel. No symbols, no author, no words. Only a title scrawled on the cover, "The Mirror That Speaks." One of the knights opened it, and the world screamed. Reality split, not wide, not catastrophically, but enough. A tear in the fabric, a breath of the warp, a tasting. The fields blackened, the air thickened. Voices poured from the walls. The knights stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a psychic barrier with their minds alone, cutting the taint from their surroundings like surgeons wielding scalpels of light. They burned the chapel. They cleansed the town. They found the source, a boy of 7 winters, untouched by ritual, unknowing, but dreaming of places that did not exist. He had been born after the book arrived, but it had already changed him. They did not kill him. They took him with them, back to Titan, not as an initiate, not yet, but as a warning. And the book? It was sealed in the Sanctum of Secrets, not because it was powerful, but because it was clever, and cleverness is what damns the unprepared. When they returned, the Inquisitor awaited them. He asked no questions, they offered no answers. He simply turned and vanished into the void. That was the first of many calls, the first time the sword was drawn, the first time the Imperium was saved without ever knowing it was in danger. And it would not be the last, because the demonic does not arrive with thunder and blood. Not always. Sometimes it comes in dreams, in books, in songs sung by children when no one is watching. And when it does, the Inquisition sees, the Grey Knights act, and the galaxy turns a little longer, unafraid, unaware, protected by the Emperor's secret blade, the Inquisitor's sword. It began with voices, not screams, not battle cries, not even the guttural chants of cultists huddled in basements beneath rusted cathedrals. Just whispers, soft as ash, elusive as breath on frost, whispers that no Vox channel could record, whispers that bypassed ears entirely, curling directly into the minds of men like smoke through a cracked door. And they always started the same way. He sees you. Not many heard them at first. A dock worker in the edge voids of Helix Station who jumped into a plasma core without a word. A preacher on Clovis Prime who gouged out his eyes and scrawled a symbol across the walls of his chapel in his own blood. A void ship helmsman who piloted his vessel into the heart of a sun while smiling. Different systems, different sectors, same whispers. Then came the dreams, nightmares shared by people who had never met, entire hab blocks waking in screams, miners clawing at the walls, sobbing about the burning book, or the man without skin who lives in the mirrors. Civilians began sketching identical symbols with no origin, spiral glyphs, constantly shifting, like they resisted being understood. Planetary governors demanded answers. Astropaths grew silent. And in the vaults beneath the Emperor's tarot in Terra's deepest sanctum, the cards changed their pattern. The veil was thinning, but only a few knew what that truly meant. One of them was a woman whose name was not spoken aloud in imperial records. An inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, sanctioned in blood and steel, her mind tempered by the Scholastica Psychana and bound by the Emperor's will. She wore no badge, carried no retinue, just a data slate bearing one word: Titan. She didn't send a message. No astropath dared touch the warp after what they'd seen. No encrypted call sign, no signal flare. She came herself. The doors of the Citadel opened only because the fortress had already sensed her approach. The walls of Titan remember power, and this one carried the scent of psychic war. She entered the Hall of Invocation alone, her boots leaving no sound, her thoughts guarded like a fortress in storm. The Grey Knights awaited her, 9 this time, standing like statues beneath the vaults of runed steel. The Inquisitor bowed. The whispers have returned. One knight stepped forward, his armor marked only with a single line etched across the helm. No name, no rank, only silence. He answered with a single word. When? Now. The whispers were not random. They were the echo of a soul trying to claw its way into the Imperium. A demon, vast and patient, older than the current age of Terra. Not a warlord of the warp, not a prince or general, but something worse. A witness, a creature that did not rule or conquer, but simply watched, feeding not on flesh or faith, but on attention. Every time a mortal looked too long into a mirror, every time a dream was remembered too clearly, every time someone asked the wrong question about the warp, it drew closer. The Ordo Malleus had given it a name once, centuries ago. Then they had buried it, because to name it was to invite it. But it was stirring again, drawn by fear, by curiosity, by those who sought forbidden knowledge in the wake of the heresy's silence. The Inquisitor had tracked the source to an ice world in the Ixian depths, a forgotten penal colony turned to madness. Administratum records showed it still functioned, shipping out minerals, receiving rations, but no one had spoken to its overseers in a decade. The last communique was a request for silence protocols. That was 3 years ago. The unseen verdict deployed under a starless sky. The Grey Knights did not arrive through the clouds or descend from thunderhawks. They appeared in flashes of silver light, teleporting directly into the command bastion. What they found was nothing. No resistance, no enemy, just silence. The prisoners were gone. So were the guards. So were the scribes, the servitors, the astropaths. Everything left behind, clothes, meals, half-written reports, remained exactly as it had been, as if everyone had simply stopped. The only sound came from deep within the processing levels, a voice, repeating, over and over again. "He sees you." The team split. 3 knights took the upper levels, checking for signs of physical life. 4 descended with the Inquisitor into the mind depths, searching for psychic resonance. 2 remained on the surface, chanting protective litanies and preparing the teleportation matrix should the veil open fully. And below the ground, in a chamber shaped like a spiral, not carved but grown, they found it. Not a creature, a mirror, 9 feet tall, frame of black stone etched in symbols that shimmered when not looked at directly. The surface was not reflective. It was still, too still. One of the knights stepped forward. He was the youngest. He had never faced a full demon manifestation before. He touched it, and in that instant, the world changed. The mind screamed, not metaphorically. The stone itself screamed. The air turned inside out. Gravity twisted. Words etched into walls now spelled backwards prayers. Blood welled from cracks in the floor, but no one had bled. And from the mirror stepped a man, or the shape of one. No skin, muscles glistening, no eyes, yet it looked. No voice, yet it spoke. "You brought them to me," it said, "to watch." The young knight struck first, too slow. The being didn't fight, it reflected. His attack struck his own armor, twisted by mirrored space flung back into him. He fell. The demon smiled. "Every act of defiance is a story," it whispered. "Every story. Remembered." The Inquisitor drew her rosarius, but said nothing. The senior knight stepped forward. He did not draw his weapon. He began to recite. Not a prayer, not a curse, but a litany of forgetting. A rite so ancient it had no name. A string of words not designed to wound, but to erase. Each line severed a piece of the demon's presence. With each stanza, the mirror lost cohesion. Cracks spread across its surface. The demon howled, not in rage, but in desperation. "Don't look away, see me." But the knights kept chanting, and the Inquisitor closed her eyes. When the final word was spoken, the mirror shattered, not into glass, but into silence. True silence, the kind that leaves no echo. The demon was not banished, it was forgotten. Its name, whatever it had been, removed from space and time. Back on Titan, the knights burned their armor, not in shame, in cleansing. Some taint cannot be seen. It lives in the folds of memory, in the edge of vision. They would not risk it lingering. The young knight lived, but he never spoke again. Not because he was broken, but because he chose not to. He had heard the whispers. He knew what it meant to be seen by something that should not exist. And now he would spend his life ensuring no one else ever heard them again. The whispers of the warp are not always roars. Sometimes they are questions. Sometimes they are curiosity. But the Grey Knights know this truth. It is not only the screaming demons that destroy worlds. It is the ones who watch, the ones who wait to be seen. And it is their duty, not just to fight them, but to make sure no one ever does. In the cold corridors of Titan, where every breath seemed to echo against stone carved with the Emperor's silent will, the Grey Knights were always training, always watching, always preparing. They were shadows waiting in stasis, storms held in stillness, a blade unsheathed only when the wound of reality ran deep. And one day, it did. It started with a scream. Not on Titan, but across the stars. A psychic scream that rippled through the warp like a blade across silk. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a beacon. It was a reaction. A death cry, not of pain, but of soul tearing. Something had broken. Not a man, not a city, but a world. Inquisitors across Segmentum Tempestus began to murmur. The Ordo Malleus stirred in its sealed citadels. A name was passed from mind to mind like a whispered threat. Prolixus, a backwater agri-world, unremarkable, no strategic importance, no ancient ruins, no history of heresy. Until now. One by one, every astropath who attempted to contact the planet vanished, not in fire, not in blood, but in silence. Minds snuffed like candles, souls erased. The first team dispatched by the Ordo Malleus, stormtroopers bearing sanction and flame, never reported back. The second team returned, changed. Only 2 of the 10 made it back to the extraction point. Both were blind. Both spoke the same phrase over and over in monotone. The gate is open. The sun bleeds lies. The garden has eyes. The Inquisitor in command purged them before their transport even docked, and then finally the Grey Knights were summoned. Not all of them, just 9, led by one of the original 7, now aged in spirit but not in form, clad in polished silver that no time could tarnish. Their orders were unspoken. Their target was Prolixus. Their mission was not to fight, it was to judge. They arrived aboard the Vigilant Blade, a ship that bore no name on its hull, no crest on its prow. It simply existed, gliding through the warp with the quiet confidence of something that had never failed. Orbiting Prolixis, the planet seemed untouched, serene, its atmosphere stable, its fields still green, its oceans calm, but nothing moved. No ships, no transmissions, no human presence, as if the world had been paused. The Grey Knights did not hesitate. They teleported directly to the surface, encased in psychic shields woven from months of meditation and ritual. They arrived in the capital spire, once home to tens of thousands. It was empty, no bodies, no blood, just signs of sudden departure, cups still warm, engines still running, food half-eaten, as if humanity had simply walked into another room and closed the door behind them. The city was silent, but their minds were not. From the moment they arrived, the knights felt it, the weight. Not oppressive, not invasive, but heavy, like standing in a cathedral made of glass, knowing something was watching from the rafters. The squad split, standard protocol. Pairs moved through the city, scanning for warp resonance, psychic interference, ritual markers. What they found was echoes. Shadows burned into walls where no fire had passed, statues with eyes that had moved when no one was watching, mirrors that reflected places that didn't exist. One knight approached a child's bedroom. Toys scattered, bed unmade. A stuffed bear sat upright in the corner and whispered. He left the door open. They burned the room. No hesitation. Further down in the Undercity, another pair found a chapel. The iconography had been changed, still shaped in the imperial design, but subtly altered. The aquila had 3 wings. The emperor's face wore a smile, and where prayers were etched into the walls, they now read, "He dreamed us into being. We dream him into becoming." That was when the decision was made. This was not a cult, not a simple infestation, not even a demonic incursion. This was incarnation, an idea that had taken root, not through force, but through belief. Someone or something had made this world think it was being watched by a god, and then convinced it to become what it believed. The gate was open, not torn, not summoned, just believed into reality, and now it was time to shut it. The ritual began in the old Administratum Tower, where the veil was thinnest. The Grey Knights formed a circle, 9 points of psychic resistance, their minds joined, their wills interlocked like the teeth of a divine lock. The Lead Knight drew his nemesis sword, not to strike, to anchor. He plunged it into the ground, through tile and steel and bedrock, until the blade hummed in harmony with the warp itself. The chanting began, low, steady, not holy, not blasphemous, just true. They spoke the Emperor's name, not as a prayer, but as a fact. The warp recoiled, reality flexed, and from the walls, from the mirrors, from the eyes of statues and the mouths of dolls, it emerged, not a demon, not a god, just a concept made flesh, a shape of shifting symmetry, a body of stained glass and ink, a face that was your own. It did not roar, it did not strike, it simply whispered, "You cannot kill a thought." The Grey Knights did not argue. They knew the truth. You can't kill a thought, but you can refuse it. They poured their will into the sword, not power, not hate, not even belief, just denial. A rejection so absolute it became reality. The creature began to fracture, not shatter, not break like glass. It forgot itself, its limbs blurred, its face twisted into uncertainty, its presence stuttered, becoming a series of questions instead of answers. And then, with one final surge of unity, the 9 unspoke its name. The city sighed, the sky brightened. The vigilant blade returned them to orbit, their armor scorched, their minds weary. One of them had aged 10 years in an hour. Another had lost all memory of his time on the planet. He would not be released from service. He would be kept in the Vault of Echoes, his soul a warning, his silence a beacon. Back on Titan, the Nine did not speak of it. They burned their tabards, reforged their weapons, and went back to training. Because that was the first dawn, not of war, of witnessing. The galaxy would not know what happened on Prolixis. No record would be kept. No tale would be told. But in the warp, something had been reminded. There are thoughts that fight, and there are thoughts that refuse. The Grey Knights are not warriors of faith. They are weapons of will. And on that day, for the first time, the darkness learned that denial is stronger than belief. Victory, in the eyes of the Imperium, is often measured in corpses and banners, in cities burned clean of heresy, in planets pulled back from the brink. The average citizen, should they survive to witness such deliverance, sees the aftermath and calls it salvation. But the Grey Knights know better. They know what it costs to hold the line against damnation, not just in blood, but in silence, in sacrifice, in purity. Because purity is not a state, it is a struggle, and maintaining it comes at a price that no other force in the galaxy, no other chapter, no other legion will ever be asked to pay. It is a price paid not only in the heat of battle, but in what comes after. What happens when the warp is pushed back, when the daemon is banished, when the veil is sealed once more? What remains is not peace, it is ash. This was learned again on the world of Vecris 17. It was a forge world, ringed in smoke and sanctified steel, a planet of cogitators and canticles, maintained by the devout of the Adeptus Mechanicus. There had been no sign of trouble, no warning, just a sudden drop in production output, followed by 3 seconds of Vox static that, when decoded by Malleus cryptographers, translated to one word: knock. The message was not answered, it was intercepted. The Ordo Malleus dispatched an investigation force, a destroyer equipped with full psychic shielding, and a trio of sanctioned psykers aboard. 17 minutes after arrival, the ship was gone. Not destroyed, not silent, just gone, as if it had never existed. This time, the Grey Knights didn't wait for confirmation. They did not call for support. They did not ask permission. They deployed. A strike force of 12, led by a knight from the original generation. His armor now etched with 10,000 wards, his mind a blade sharper than any forged in metal. They arrived not in stealth, but in warning. Vecris 17's skies peeled open, warp storms crackling across the upper atmosphere as the knights pierced reality with the force of their arrival. The Mechanicus defense systems tried to engage them out of protocol, then shut down entirely, recognizing that no ritual could encompass what had just entered their domain. The Forge world was quiet. Too quiet. The usual choir of machine prayers and vox hymns was gone. No binary chatter, no scraping of servitor limbs, no thrum of sacred industry. Only wind. Unnatural. Warm. It carried the scent of oil and something else. Cinnamon. They made their way to the primary data vault. What they found was not destruction. It was mockery. The walls had been reshaped, not destroyed, but rewritten. Glyphs not of the Mechanicus, but of the warp. Circuitry carved in spirals, auspex units that displayed faces instead of data. And the tech priests, still alive, still functioning, but changed. They sang not in Binaric, but in a language none of the knights recognized, because it wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be felt. It scraped against their minds like broken glass wrapped in silk. When one of the servitors turned, its face was smooth, featureless. Then it smiled. The knights engaged. No quarter, no mercy, not because of wrath, but because of necessity. They moved through the forges like fire through paper. Every kill was a mercy. Every step forward was a statement. This ends here, but at the heart of the primary sanctum, they found the truth. It was not a summoning. It was not possession. It was reprogramming. Someone had written a daemon into the code. A scripted heresy, a self-replicating psychic algorithm that infected not data, not machines, but souls. The tech priests had not summoned it. They had installed it, not out of malice. Out of logic, the code offered solutions, smarter machines, better crops, deeper understanding of the Omnissiah. All it required was belief, recitation, integration, and slowly, line by line, it rewrote the world. One knight attempted to trace the code. A lexicanum gifted in both psychic warfare and language. He reached out to the data stream with his mind, hoping to locate the source. He found it, and it found him. For 13 seconds, his body convulsed. His eyes bled copper. He screamed a name that had no vowels. Then he stopped. When they reached him, he was alive, but hollow. His soul had been encoded, locked behind symbols no rite could erase. He was placed in stasis, a warning in armor. The remaining 11 fought to the heart of the infestation, a data core reconfigured into a mouth, constantly chanting binary mixed with laughter. Behind it, a gate was forming, not wide, not open, just a crack. Just enough. The Grey Knights encircled it. They could not destroy it, not without detonating the planetary core, but they could seal it. The ritual was not in the Librarium Daemonica. It was not in any codex. It was in him, the leader, one of the original 7. He stepped into the mouth and closed it behind him. There was no explosion, no scream, just silence. And then the data core began to crumble, bit by bit. The knights departed, but their work was not done, because now came the price. Vecrus 17 was not destroyed, but it was no longer pure. Every data node, every system, every line of code was suspect. And so the knights ordered exterminatus, not with virus bombs, with fire. They walked through the forges. They burned the sacred machines. They purged the cogitators. They silenced every echo. The Adeptus Mechanicus protested, but not to their faces, because they knew some data is worth more than lives, but less than a soul. When the last flame guttered out, only ash remained. Ash and one name, etched into the broken data core, carved in the lexicanum's blood. He dreams in digits. On Titan, the remaining knights did not speak of Vecrus 17. They did not mark the fallen with a statue. They did not write the name of the one who had sealed the breach. They did not restore the armor of the one now locked in stasis. Because silence is not absence, it is remembrance made sacred. Purity was preserved, but not without cost, and the Grey Knights paid it, willingly. Because this is the price of their purpose, that nothing they save will ever know they did so, that every world they protect must never remember their names, that purity is not a reward, it is a burden, and they bear it in silence. The galaxy did not know they existed, it never would. It did not carve statues in their honor, nor did it sing songs of their victories. When battle hymns were composed for the glories of the Legiones Astartes or the sagas of imperial saints, the Grey Knights were not included. Their names were absent, their deeds unrecorded. And yet, when the veil tore, when the stars bled, when the warp's breath kissed the edge of real space, it was not the armies of mankind who stood ready. It was them. They were the guardians eternal. The blade behind the curtain, the fire beneath the ash, the shield no one knew they needed. By the time the age of the Imperium had begun its slow, grinding existence in the wake of the Horus Heresy, Titan had returned from the warp, not with thunder, not in flame, quietly, as if it had never left. The moon's reappearance went unrecorded by the Navis Nobilitae. No star charts were altered. No scribes of Mars noticed its shift in gravitational alignment. Even the Adeptus Custodes, watchers of all that moved around Terra, simply looked past it. That was by design. The wards the Emperor had woven into Titan's core, amplified by Malcador's final rites and anchored by the first of the Grey Knights, ensured it remained hidden not just from warp sight, but from reality itself. It was a moon out of phase, a fortress wrapped in silence, and from it the Guardians emerged. One strike cruiser at a time, one mission at a time. No glory, no heralds, just presence. In those early centuries following the heresy, the Imperium staggered, reeling, bleeding. Its heroes were dead or vanished, its primarchs broken or missing. The bureaucratic machine of Terra groaned under its own weight. It was an age of recovery. But for the Grey Knights, it was the age of vigilance. They did not look for war, they listened for it. And war for them was never announced with banners or declarations. It came with whispers, a warp anomaly on a distant outpost, a sudden silence from an astropathic choir, a string of suicides among a planetary nobility whose dreams had become haunted. When such signs emerged, the Ordo Malleus turned to their hidden hand, and the Grey Knights answered. Not always with armies, often with only a squad, 4 warriors, sometimes 5, never more than needed. Their deployments were surgical, precise as a scalpel, cutting away infection before it could spread. Before the heresy could become belief, before belief could summon truth, before truth could become a god. They cleansed hive cities without ever stepping foot outside the underhive. They purged demon cults that never even realized they had summoned anything real. They battled horrors from beyond comprehension in the void between stars, boarding cursed vessels that screamed in the voices of dead planets. They never asked for aid, and they never asked for forgiveness, because what they did often left scars, not just on the battlefield, on the soul of the Imperium. There was the world of Cartharax, whose entire population, 300,000 souls, had unknowingly been living on a world carved from the husk of a greater demon, its consciousness dormant beneath the crust. When it began to stir, the Grey Knights arrived. They didn't warn the planet. They didn't call a conclave. They simply enacted Protocol 777 Silentum. The core of Cartharax was atomized by a relic device activated from orbit, a relic kept beneath Titan in a vault of psychic nulls, used only twice in history. The surface crumbled into itself. The demon never woke. The world was marked as lost to plague by the Administratum. No one ever asked why the stars above it changed color for 13 days. That was the kind of war the Grey Knights fought. Not the kind others could see, not the kind others could understand, but always, always the kind the Imperium needed to be fought. They learned over time how to move even more subtly. The warp is a beast that learns, evolves. What resisted it once may not resist it again. So the Grey Knights adapted. They developed rites of memory suppression, not for themselves, though even they bore burdens too heavy to remember, but for others. When guardsmen encountered them in battle, they fought alongside the knights in awe, silver giants, psyker killers who burned demons to ash with a glance, whose very footsteps made heretics scream. And when the battle was done, those guardsmen slept and woke, clean. No memory, no trauma, no contamination. It was better that way, safer. Some inquisitors chafed at their independence. Even within the Ordo Malleus, there were those who sought to bind the Grey Knights more tightly to doctrine, to codify their movements, to assert control. They failed, because the Grey Knights do not serve any single inquisitor. They serve the mission, the Emperor, and no one else. On Titan, the halls remained unchanged. The walls still whispered their litanies. The forges still glowed with silent fire. The Librarium Daemonica still held its secrets, locked behind psychic wards older than any language. The original 7, those first chosen by Malcador, were no longer spoken of, not out of disrespect, but because their legacy was now everywhere. In every blade drawn against the warp, in every armor rune etched in silence, in every oath sworn without audience. And in time, new knights took their place. They were not trained in mass. They were selected from orphans whose dreams burned with holy fire, from psykers who resisted temptation by sheer will, from broken warriors who refused to break. Each one was tested, each one was remade, not to be great, to be pure, because that was what the galaxy could never understand. The Grey Knights were not the Emperor's vengeance. They were his refusal, his whispered answer to the warp's eternal question. Will you surrender? Number never. They are the line that holds, the candle that burns even when all other stars are extinguished. They are the voice that says, this far, no further. They are the guardians eternal, and the galaxy still stands because of them, even if it never knows why. The galaxy does not mark its true turning points with triumph or parades. The Imperium, vast and blind by necessity, does not see the moments where its very soul is saved from damnation. It cannot. It must not. And so it did not see the first true victory of the Grey Knights. It would not remember the day. It would not remember the name of the world, and it would never know the demon's final scream. But the Knights remember. They remember the first blood. The first time their blades did more than train. The first time the enemy looked upon them and understood fear. It began on a world called Varantha, a dead moon circling a gas giant in the halo stars, long abandoned by humanity. Its surface was jagged, broken by tectonic violence centuries past, and its thin atmosphere was laced with toxins. There was nothing of value there, which is why, when the warp began to seep from its crust like smoke through stone, no one noticed, except those few who were watching. The Ordo Malleus intercepted a signal from a black ship passing nearby. A low-level astropath had burst into flames mid-chant, not from psychic overload, but from possession. His last words, channeled in voices that did not belong to him, were, "He remembers their names." The Inquisition knew what that meant. A demon of ancient origin had found its way back into real space, one who had lived through the Old Night, one who had fought during the Horus Heresy and survived. Its name was not spoken aloud, it was not written. It was locked in the deepest vault of Titan's Librarium Daemonica, behind a warded door inscribed in no human tongue. The name, Gargatuloth, a prince of lies, a horror of reflection and temptation. Not a war demon, no crimson blade, no thunderous footfall, but something far more dangerous. A weaver, a creature that turned belief into reality, whose every whisper birthed cults, whose gaze alone could bend truth into madness. 10,000 years ago, he had been banished by a desperate alliance of the Emperor's psykers and the Custodian Guard during the Shadow Wars of the Heresy. Now he had returned, and so did the Grey Knights, 300 of them, the full strength of the chapter. It was the first time since the great work had ended that they had all stood together in full warplate. From the youngest aspirants to the most weathered of the original 7, they gathered in silence upon Titan, not with banners or war horns, but with purpose etched into steel and soul. The Grand Master, Janus, first among equals, spoke only once before deployment. "This is why we were made." Then they vanished, teleported not through crude mechanics, but through psychic resonance, each strike force bound to a different node of Varantha's fractured surface. They arrived in pulses of silver light, sanctified by the words of the Emperor carved into their very thoughts, and the war began. It was not war as mortals knew it. There were no front lines, no trenches, no strategies of attrition. There was only hunting. Gargatuloth had not yet fully manifested, his essence still clawed at the veil, struggling to cohere in reality. But his cult had grown. Hundreds of worshippers who had heard his name in their dreams, drawn from ships, void stations, even distant psyker enclaves. They had come to Varantha as if called. They had begun the ritual, and now the knights would stop them. Squad by squad, they descended into the cracks of the moon, into catacombs pulsing with unnatural life. They found temples made of bone. They found prayers carved in reverse into the walls, meant to be read in dreams. They found altars soaked not in blood, but in memory, the psychic echoes of those who had surrendered willingly to the warp. And they burned it all, with flame, with blade, with truth. The Nemesis Force weapons, blessed and bound to their wielders' wills, shattered illusions, severed limbs, carved through demonic flesh like sunlight through shadow. And the chanting began to falter. The cultists screamed. The veil began to flicker. Gargatuloth was being dragged into the world. But something was wrong. He felt it. He knew. This was not the Imperium he remembered. These were not the Astartes he had faced during the heresy. These warriors were different. Their minds did not flinch. Their faith was not blind. Their purity was not performative. It was absolute. And for the first time in his long, cursed existence, the demon felt fear. In the deepest cavern, at the heart of the ritual site, the final battle began. Gargatuloth had taken form, not fully, but enough. His body was a shifting mass of golden eyes, wings that bled scripture, limbs made of regret. His voice caused stone to peel, his presence warped time. And before him stood Janus, blade drawn, helm removed, eyes locked with the unblinking gaze of the warp-made flesh. The two did not speak. They did not need to. Janus walked forward, each step pushing against a tide of unreality. He recited no prayer. He whispered no rite. He simply remembered why he existed, and struck. The battle was not long, but it was costly. Dozens of knights died, bodies incinerated, minds shattered, souls torn. Each death sent a ripple through the psychic tapestry they had woven together. But they held. And when Gargatuloth tried to retreat, back into the warp, back to safety, the trap was sprung. The librarians had sealed the gate. There was no escape. The demon's form collapsed in upon itself, shrieking not in rage, but in confusion. "You were not meant to resist me," it howled. "You were not meant to exist," Janus answered. "We were made for you." And with one final blow, the demon prince of lies was banished, not sealed, not delayed, unmade. It was the first true demonic kill of the Grey Knights, not a cult, not a manifestation. A prince of the warp, slain by purity and will. The victory was absolute, and it was never recorded. Varantha was bombarded from orbit, not out of vengeance, but caution. No trace would remain. No one would ever speak of the battle, not even the knights. Back on Titan, the names of the fallen were inscribed not on monuments, but in memory, etched into the librarium's silent halls, their weapons placed in the Hall of Echoes, their armor ritually burned, and Janus, standing alone in the sanctum, whispered a single line into the empty air. "We have drawn first blood." The war had truly begun, and the galaxy would never know. But the warp would. The warp would remember, because for the first time in its immortal hunger, it had tasted fear. The Grey Knights had arrived, and the demons would never sleep soundly again.